Hello and welcome to Tales from the Vault. In today's show, we'll be looking back at some of the best moments and greatest drivers to have won at probably the most iconic race on the Formula One calendar, the Grand Prix of Monaco. Joining me in the studio tonight, okay, let's introduce our stellar lineup. Joining me to look back over these best moments are three very special guests. First, we have not only a 3-times Formula One world champion, but also a 3-times Monaco race winner. And simply, he's one of the greatest drivers in the history of Formula One, Sir Jackie Stewart. Next up, a man who was the racing coordinator for McLaren from 1984 to 2001 and who was there when the Senna and Prost rivalry was at its most intense. He was also involved at McLaren as they won an incredible 11 Monaco Grand Prix during his tenure. He's worked for Shadow, he's worked for Eagle at Monaco, he's worked for many teams. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Mexico, Joe Ramirez. And our final guest is a familiar face to Sky F1 viewers, a 3-times Grand Prix winner, one of whom was with Jackie Stewart, and a man who finished on the podium at Monaco in 1996, Johnny Herbert. Also with us today, to our very own Natalie Pinkham, who'll be amongst the studio audience, getting their views and questions. Natalie?
Yes, indeed. We've got this lovely studio audience. They're a rather lively bunch, so expect some good stories from them. I'll be coming to you lot a bit later on. For now, though, gentlemen, it's over to you.
Well, Sir Jackie, Monte Carlo, it's a small word, but it's such a big race. It has so much history, so much heritage. And I wondered if we could begin by asking you to recall a little bit 1966, when you won there for the first time, first of 3 wins. Looking at that race, looking at the footage, it looks like an iconic Monaco. The Beatles were there. They were making a movie at the same time, and you won that Grand Prix. And your teammate was Graham Hill, who was a difficult man to beat as well.
Well, I think Monaco's still the most glamorous Grand Prix of the world. I suppose because it started so many years ago, I think 1929, and people like Fangio were there and all the great drivers and Sterling and so forth. And the fact that Princess Grace, I think, changed Monaco, because Prince Rainier was a glamorous man, but Princess Grace really added another dimension that I don't think any other Grand Prix ever had. And when you won Monaco, first of all, she presented the trophy, and secondly, on the night of the Grand Prix, the gala is still going on, and the winner sat next to Princess Grace, and the winner's wife sat next to Prince Rainier. So Helen was with Prince Rainier, and I was with Princess Grace. But you're actually wrong about Monaco, because I won it 4 times. In a Formula 3 car, I won it. And I always think I won Monaco.
Exactly.
And in Formula 3, you also, the winner sat on one side of Princess Grace in Formula 1, and the winner of the Formula 3 sat on the other side of Princess Grace. So that was a treat. So, I mean, the racetrack's wonderful, as all of us know, and challenging, but I think the glamour of it was so fantastic.
But how much as a professional Formula One driver could you enjoy and breathe in the glamour? How much did you have to remain Jackie Stewart? How much could you be enjoying the Hotel de Paris, the casino?
No, you wrote all that off. I mean, you cleared your head, you removed the emotion. That's the thing I learned about most. To win, you had to be emotionless. Before and after is another matter, but to win in Monaco, you know, airfield circuits were still around then, as is today the sort of circuits that we see where people run off the road and they still continue. You know, there's no penalty for running off the road. In Monaco, there's always been a penalty, so you could never take liberties. So your concentration, your commitment, and never over-driving, because if you did, you were hitting a curbstone, and in those days the curbs were 90-degree curbs. Now they're all chamfered, so you broke a wheel, and you certainly punctured a tyre just by kissing, you know, a curb. So it was a different challenge then than even when I think my last Grand Prix win, they were beginning to chamfer them. But they're still you know, there were straw bales still in 1966, right, I think, up until about 1970 in certain places in Monaco.
Johnny, you've always loved the glamorous side of Formula One. How did you marry that with being the race driver going to Monaco for the first time? What was your feel for the principality?
I don't know what you meant at the beginning of that one at all, but no, it's like Jackie said. I think the build-up was something else. Again, I lived down there for a few years, so seeing the whole thing start to be built, everything coming together, the pit complex being built up, that was brilliant to see that change from what almost I said was sort of an old fishing village. Turning into a Grand Prix race track. And once it was all built and it was all there, and it's like Jackie said, the biggest thing with it is the challenge. And I think that's what I thoroughly enjoyed about the place. You had the aura of everything that was there. You had everything that was there, the history of Princess Grace and Rainier. And I think and Albert does a brilliant job now keeping Monaco so important in Europe. And I think it's still important for the drivers to drive the track and win there.
Joe, you've worked with many drivers as they've got to know Monaco and what it means to be at that race, that showpiece window. One of the first was the brilliant Ricardo Rodriguez, the young Mexican. You were also working for Giancarlo Baghetti at the time, I think, 62. Yeah. We're going back to 1962.
Yeah, 62, that was
but
my...
What was it like taking these young guys to that circuit? And how could you hold them back enough to survive, but to be quick as well?
I was very green then because it was my first race. I was just there I was the apprentice at Ferrari, you know, go for this, go for that type of guy, you know, clean the cars and do the tea and that sort of thing. But it was enjoyable. It was Ricardo did the practice, but he didn't race because we had a 3 entry. We couldn't get the 4th entry, or Ferrari couldn't get the 4th entry. It's like Johnny said, Monaco is just something so special. And to me, I always liked it, that the fact that it was over 4 days. And the mechanics had at least 2 nights that they could go out and party, and there's a lot of parties,
nice.
You know.
Well, it's nice, isn't it? Because we're talking as drivers, yes. But of course he's talking as a mechanic.
Well, speaking of parties, though, and drivers who enjoyed parties, let's introduce Mr. Monaco, Graham Hill. Yeah. Your teammate, Sir Jackie, when you started at BRM in 1965, and already he was a Monaco hero.
Graham was an exceptional man. You know, I was the number 2 driver. I was a young puppy coming up. And, you know, Scotland had produced Jim Clark, who by that time was winning everything. Another whippersnapper, Betty Hill, called me, because Jimmy was a whippersnapper too, apparently. And that was a privilege. But Graham never once, with all the racing we did and being number 2, and very much number 2 at BRM, because he really was the whole cornerstone of BRM's racing, with Sir Atkins as chief mechanic and all that. He never once was difficult to work with. He was magical to work with. He told me everything I ever asked him. There was no secrets. There was no, oh, I'm not going to tell you that.
Just like Michael when you were at Benetton, Johnny.
Yeah. Yes, there was no paperwork shared anywhere. That one. But it's lovely.
Sorry to interrupt.
But that was nice, because that is part and parcel, I thought, of what the game was all about as well. Monaco is the exception when that was really good, where you could talk with each other and get the best from yourselves as well.
You know, Polanski did a film with me in Monaco, and there was one time when Francois was asking about gear ratios and so forth, and it was all conversation. It wasn't telemetry. So you were actually giving the feel of the car rather than the vision of the telemetry. And at a circuit like Monaco, to be able to have counsel from a Graham Hill was a big deal, because, you know, it was a nervous place to go to as a young driver, and particularly in Formula One. And I actually spun on Bandini's oil at Zandvoort.
Coming up the hill, yeah.
Yeah, and I was I not leading the race?
You were leading, yeah.
And I spun off and luckily didn't do any damage and continued.
I'd love to get your thoughts on this, though. Graham won that race, and it was one of the classic Formula One wins, let alone Monaco wins, because you were following him, I think, when he got balked by a slower car and had to go up the escape road, stalled the car, got out of the BRM, no seat belts then, push-started it, or got it started again with the marshals, got back in, and won the race.
Yeah.
No seatbelts, I guess, was the key to that ultimately, because then you introduced them in '66.
Yeah,
couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, but we badly needed them. But no. Graham had Monaco sorted out 5 times, wasn't it? He won Monaco. and in difficult times. You know, it was very competitive in these days. It was a 1.5 litre engine the very first year, which you know, wasn't that difficult to drive. As you got more powerful, it was obviously more difficult to drive. So it's a stop and go circuit. You know, it's all acceleration and braking. How smoothly you do that and how you stay out of trouble was how you won Monaco. And Graham knew how to win Monaco.
So here's the big question. The gala dinner, everybody in black tie, wonderful. But then what was the nightclub you used to go to back in the 60s? What was the place after that?
Rosie's was the nightclub. But after the race, it was down just next to Rampoldi's. The Tip Top. And everybody went there. I mean, all the drivers were there, all the mechanics were there, the whole entourage were there, even had the media there.
Unbelievable.
And no television there. You know, television was not televised. The whole, I don't know, the Grand Prix was televised, but it wouldn't have been live. It would have been a delayed telecast, I think.
Well, no, I think
and by the way, they closed the street almost. Everybody was out in the street. You could never, to get up the hill or down the hill, you know, between the Casino Square and Mirabeau, it was just jammed with people.
I think we have a question, Natalie, from the
audience. We do. I was just going to say, though, social media and those camera phones have changed all that, haven't they? Those drivers aren't allowed out now. OK, so first question from you, Simon. Who's it to?
It's to Sir Jackie. Does Monaco remain the race that every driver wants to win?
Yeah. If you don't win Monaco, there's something wrong with your CV. If you're winning World Championships or winning Grand Prix, if you haven't won Monaco...
Is that a dig?
Well, it's a difficult CV over here, but it's, for me at least, if I hadn't won Monaco, you had to win Monaco and you had to win the Nürburgring, the old ring. These were the two, and you had to win your own Grand Prix. But Monaco, I think, still is the sort of star of all of the Grand Prix to win, because the glamour, the colour, the excitement. All the superstars used to come to the Monaco, and still do, by the way. But you said all the Beatles were there, for example, but Cary Grant came, Frank Sinatra came, Betty Davis came because of Princess Grace. She would invite people who she had worked with. I met
Elizabeth Taylor with you.
Elizabeth Taylor came with me. Well, Helen and I. But, I mean, that was the level.
Simon would like a bit more on that story.
You're a married woman, now you be careful. So I think the answer is yes.
Also, presumably, because it's so technically difficult, it's a real driver's race, isn't it? Separates the men from the boys.
Yes, I think so. But I think it was more than that. It was just the maturity of not making mistakes. You know, because any young driver is going to make... I spun on that year that I was leading the Monaco Grand Prix. I mean, what a fiasco that was.
But that was oil, Jackie. Had a good excuse.
Doesn't matter. I should have known about it. I should have seen it. I should have sensed it. Graham Hill didn't spin on it. It was a puppy that spun on it.
OK, I've got another question for you. Adam? Yes. Where are you?
My question's to Johnny, and what are the biggest challenges a driver faces at racing at Monaco?
The biggest thing is, to me, was qualifying. I always thought that was the ultimate of all the circuits that I've ever been to. Maybe Po is another one similar to that, because you could not make an error at all. The whole idea, the principle in my mind, was always trying to actually skim the barrier to use the full sort of capacity of the road. Then you got the full drive all the way down the straight. So to actually hit the barrier with the rim, and then you hear it sort of ricochet down actually the barrier itself, you knew you'd got it right. So that challenge was one thing as a whole lap. But I always thought Casino Square, to go into Casino and get through Casino all the way down to Mirabeau, which was so difficult to get right, because you had sort of quite an amount of power, 800 horsepower underneath you, but to get that to shoot yourself down the hill was really important. And then you got the sort of the tricky last bit through probably Rascasse, which was quite a hard one. It's a bit easier now because they've opened it up and made it a lot more straighter to brake. But I never got the perfect lap, I think, anywhere. I don't know if Jackie did. He probably did. But that was the place that if he was able to do that, I think that was where you were able to dominate it, like someone like Graham and maybe Ayrton.
I think the mechanics will know if you were trying hard enough or not. If your tires were not marked all the way, then you were not trying.
That's a great point.
Right, after the break, we'll be getting more insight from Sir Jackie, Joe and Johnny as we'll be looking back at some of the truly great races from Monaco.
Riccardo Patrese comes up to the line to win his first Grand Prix, certainly the most exciting, momentous Grand Prix I have ever seen. Ayrton Senna, and victory in the 1991 Monaco Grand Prix.
Olivier Panis for Ligier Mugen Honda to win the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix, an incredible result.
And Lewis Hamilton wins the Monaco Grand Prix.
In a 10-year span between 1984 and 1993, there were two great McLaren drivers who won the Monaco Grand Prix 9 times between them. You may have heard of them.
Wins the Monaco Grand Prix.
What an absolutely sensational finish.
Of course, I'm talking about Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. And with us tonight is a man who was with them all the way, Joe Ramirez. Joe, looking at that immense amount of success and what McLaren achieved there, it's difficult to imagine that they didn't qualify a few years before Monaco, but that just shows the ups and downs, I suppose, doesn't it?
It's amazing when I hear you saying it. It was a circuit that, I don't know, suit our cars, suit our drivers, and we always did well there. And, you know, Ayrton won it with us 5 times, I think.
Yeah,
one with
once
Lotus.
with Lotus, yeah. 6
and he could have won it 7 times, really. In '88, it was his race, and he lost his head,
87 was Mansell's race, really. But anyway, we won't go into that. What everybody wants to know is why and how. What was that era all about for you at McLaren then?
Well, that 1988 is absolutely amazed when you think that if he was... Alain Prost was kind of the standard at Monaco. He used to set the pace. And Ayrton comes and is 1.5 seconds quicker in qualifying. Can you imagine anybody being 1.5 seconds? And Prost was still a second quicker than Berger in 3rd place in qualifying. So that was amazing how Ayrton could take that extra adrenaline or whatever, extra horsepower for 1 lap in qualifying.
The Ayrton I knew never admitted, like Johnny, whoever driving the perfect lap, but I'm interested to know Jackie's thoughts on that. Did you ever feel you got near perfection on a lap of Monaco?
I don't think I felt as if I had really done one perfectly. Keep in mind there were manual gear changes in those days, and that in Monaco you had 28 gear changes per lap, not with a paddle, but actual manually. And it was 100 laps.
100 lap race, yeah.
So you would drop a gear from time to time, and that was one of the times when you could pass somebody if somebody missed a gear.
Yeah.
But doing the perfect lap, it wasn't that difficult to do the perfect lap, almost because you were never at 10 tenths in Monaco, in my mind. Now, the lap that Ayrton did, he was at 11 tenths, but nothing happened. But that would have been too fast for me, because in Monaco, you can't afford in qualifying or practice to damage the car, because you don't get it back, and therefore you've missed a whole session. So you never went that fast. You went fast enough that you still got what you needed.
Which I think Alain was like, wasn't it? I think Alain had a very similar mindset to yourself.
I mean, the basic difference between the two of them is that when Alain had a perfect car, it was unbeatable. But how often you have a perfect car? Not very often. What Ayrton could improvise and shoot or change his driving to suit the car. And that was one of the big advantages that Ayrton had.
Joe, Crichton Brown, who you remember well, we remember fondly, great friend of Ayrton's as well, once told me that Ayrton told him that on some very special qualifying laps, he tried to hold his breath for as long as possible during the lap to heighten his senses. And I just wondered whether Johnny and Jackie had anything to say about that. Would that have ever occurred to you, Jackie?
The only time you held your breath was in a really quick corner, for me. The quick corner where you held your breath, sometimes at Spa, you would go around the master, you would hold your breath. Austria, at the top of the hill, turning right when it was fast up there, you held your breath. My pulse rate went up to 202 because I was all monitored at one time. 202, you know, a runner doesn't get to 202 in the Olympics. So, but it was because we weren't breathing. It wasn't because you were overly exercising, it was the fact that you weren't breathing.
But it's funny, that's sort of come out recently, hasn't it, with Nico Rosberg, who has spoken about a very similar thing from last year, trying to change his breathing habits to better himself for this season. So it's an interesting one. For me, I think it's a similar thing. Qualifying, especially in Monaco, I think the holding your breath was something I seem to do automatically. I was hanging on for dear life.
Probably not blinking.
Thinking about Ayrton for a moment. In those days, when Ayrton and Alan were away, I was doing commentary for ABC's Wide World of Sports in America. And I'll never forget watching Ayrton, because I always wanted to study the racing drivers. When Ayrton came in, his eyes were absolutely alive. I mean, he was almost ghost-like with his intensity. And I always thought that was wrong. I thought he was over the top when he was doing that. I thought he needed to calm down. Now, to get the lap you're talking about, he was right over the top. So Alan Prost, I don't think, ever went right over the top. And I'm one of the few people, and I would say right now that Alan Prost was the driver of that time, and Ayrton was the most exciting, the most glamorous, and the, you know, in every respect, the fastest in a way. But Alan actually ended up winning more races and more world championships just because of the way he went about his business.
We used to tell him, if you do a quick one, let us know, because we're going to miss it. For sure.
Well, 88, that great pole lap, but let's have a look and see what happened in the race.
That is Senna. Sensation. On lap 67, Ayrton Senna goes out of the lead of the Monaco Grand Prix at the Portier. For the second time this year, Brazilian Ayrton Senna is out of a race.
Joe Ramirez, I think that we can go straight to you for this one now. What's Ayrton thinking at that moment? You spoke to him very shortly afterwards in his hotel.
No, not that shortly. Well, I mean, about 9 o'clock I found it. You know, he went, funnily enough, his apartment was in Princess Grace, which is only 100 meters from, so he went straight out to his apartment and on communicate, we called, the telephone was not answering. Eventually at 9 o'clock he answered. It was, I think Isabel was her name, the Brazilian girl used to look after the flat. And I said, Isabel, is Ayrton there? No, Senor Senna, Senor Ayrton is not here. No, for sure, he should be there. Please, I need to talk to him. No, he's not here. And I was pleading to her, look, tell him it's Joe. I'm sure he talked to me. Eventually, I got it on the phone. He was still crying at 9 o'clock. He said, oh, I must be the most stupid guy in the phone. I clipped that portiere and the steering wheel jumped out of my mind, and I ended up, I was in the other. And he was just crying, you know. He was a guy that he made very few mistakes, but when he made them, you couldn't tell him anything. He just punished himself so much that the guy was destroyed completely. But it was the obsession he had about Prost, you know. Yeah. He had a 50-odd seconds in front, but a minute is up because Prost was bulked by Berger for most of the race. And when he passed Berger, he started making fastest lap. But he was still 50 seconds, and he was run then, he's saying, slow down, he's never going to catch another fastest lap for Ayrton Senna, another fastest lap. And in the end, he just...
I'm interested to know what you did. What did you say to him, Joe?
After?
When you were with him, when he told you all this, what...
But like I said, I was speechless. I couldn't really say anything because, you know, when he said, oh, I'm the most stupid man in the world, I couldn't say, yes, you bloody well are. But that's how he felt. It was just, the guy was destroyed. You know, he didn't tolerate mistakes from the team. He didn't tolerate from him even less.
So Jackie and Johnny, it was a bit of an odd mistake that, because he actually clipped the apex of Le Portier, which you'd call a misjudgment rather than just going too quickly. It wasn't like one of these things on exit, and it's an interesting point, isn't it? If you're actually trying to drive below your limit, how difficult is that at Monaco in terms of concentration? Because that sort of leads difficult, isn't it? You know, because you've got the teammate starting to catch you. At the same time, you've got to conserve the car, not make mistakes, but you've still got to be the racing driver.
Yeah, but I think it goes to what Joe says about Ayrton's mentality. It was always to be on that edge all the way through. It was almost a way of him punishing Prost. So it was just trying to get the best out of himself and keep that gap as big as it was. The concentration is something that comes into play, that if you are then thinking about what's going on behind, that is then those mistakes come into play.
Yes, but again, you go back to the greatest of them all, Juan Manuel Fangio. It was he who coined that phrase, you win at the slowest possible speed. Yeah. You don't go fast when you don't need to. And that's the difference between the Prost and the Senna period. You know, to keep punching at an absolute limit. When you hit an apex like that, you either have it as a drop-off from your head, you've lost a little concentration because you're well in the lead, or you're still pushing. And in those days, it was still chamfered. So for him to override that, he probably made a mistake, actually, on the entry when you're on the left-hand side. And he turned in, and it was just a wee bit too. He turned in too fast, too much, really. Yeah. And that he wouldn't have done had he been backed off a wee bit. Because when you back off a wee bit, it's really pretty easy. You know, it's not difficult because your skill is so high, and the car in that time, there's no doubt the McLaren was the best car. So to make that mistake was a real mistake, and he knew it. So that because he had the margin of lead, it was silly to be driving that hard.
One of the great arts, winning at the slowest possible speed. Natalie, I think we have some more questions.
We do. I was just going to say, the more we talk about Senna, the more it reminds me of Lewis. The emotion, constantly pushing hard, beating himself up afterwards. Would you agree?
No, I think Lewis is more mind-managed than when he's driving a racing car than actually Ayrton was in that time. I don't think he would drive as hard as Ayrton did in that Monaco issue, that far ahead. You just... And of course, the times have changed, the amount of knowledge and the amount... See, racing drivers don't get a lot of driving nowadays. Grand Prix driver doesn't get much driving nowadays. They don't drive other formulas. They don't drive in supporting races. They don't... You know, they're doing Formula One, and you can't make mistakes if you're only doing a certain number of races a year. We were doing 50 races a year, and touring cars, GT cars, Indy cars, Can-Am cars, everything. And you learned a lot more because you were driving a lot more. But in the case of going back to Lewis right now, I don't think you would have seen Lewis trying to keep a 50-second gap.
This is one of Ayrton's things. He just wanted to demoralize his co-driver.
Well, it was that rivalry thing, wasn't it?
Rivalry. Yeah. OK, from Richard, your question?
Yeah, to the three of you. And Senna's achievement of 6 Monaco wins, do you reckon in the current era and the future era of F1, is that likely to be beaten or not?
Johnny, let's hear you on that.
Well,
somebody going to...
There's always a chance of it. We've seen sort of, you know, domination from a Red Bull for only 4 years. But if that does come into play and the driver's in the right place, Lewis could be in that situation.
He's a bit short of Monaco wins at the moment.
No, yes, but with the domination of that Mercedes at the moment, that's something that it could sort of start to happen. But I think it's very different, I think, now than what it was back in the 60s, because reliability was always one thing. Like Jackie said, there was a gear stick, drivers made errors, where the errors are much, much less defined, because the only one you can make is actually a driver error itself when hitting the barrier. But there's the mechanical side of it is utterly sort of looked after by all the engineers. It could happen. Michael sort of, you know, didn't have a bad run at it as well, and we will always see a special one. I think we saw it with Jackie back in sort of the late 60s, and then we've seen it with Ayrton, probably with Niki Lauda. There's always a special one that sort of stands out, and Monaco is the place where he would stand out, far and above. That's where Lewis has got to correct it, maybe.
The one record I hated that Ayrton lost it was the pole position. I think he was the expert on that, 65 pole position. I thought he was maybe never got broken, but Michael did, and that's the one I felt that Senna should have kept.
Yeah, but it comes back to Sir Jackie's point, doesn't it, of what is the most critical thing, the poles or the fastest laps and the race wins.
I never thought pole position was a terribly important thing in those days. I mean, I didn't have any. I mean, I only had about 17 or 19 pole positions my whole career. We always were preparing the car only for the race. You think Ken Tyrrell's attitude was, what are you trying, the race is a long race. Don't just have a car that's going to be able to deliver not just in the first few laps or the middle period, more importantly, the end period.
Monaco's the exception. That's the only thing, because you need
You've got to be in the front row.
You need to be on the front row,
that's
at
for sure,
least.
unless something very unusual
You did all right in '96 from the middle of the grid to third.
I know, and I was last.
No, I think your
was
teammate
fourth.
was a lap
but
behind
he
you or
pulled in.
something,
He
wasn't
pulled in a lap before.
After the break, we'll look at more recent Monaco winners.
The Monaco Grand Prix of 1994 has been won by Michael Schumacher from Germany. Michael Schumacher wins the 55th Monaco Grand Prix, the first for Ferrari since 1981. And victory for Schumacher and Ferrari in 1999. Superb! Coasting home, Michael. Schumacher wins in Monaco.
Welcome back to Tales from the Vault. Some lovely memories of Michael Schumacher there. 5 times winner of Monaco, around the streets of Monaco, wonderful driver, and some amazing statistics that come out of Michael. But on the flip side, some other statistics as well, some one-off winners at Monaco that just suddenly came together for them. Jarno Trulli, to name one. Olivier Panis won in '96 against incredibly difficult, tough opposition. Johnny, where did you finish in '96?
Third.
Very
Nearly
good.
last.
No, but that was an
Harold,
amazing race, wasn't it? It was a classic Monaco with everything going on. A little bit like 1982 when, in the immortal words of James Hunt, does anybody want to win this race? When Riccardo Patrese actually managed to stagger across the line. But for you, those memories of the podium, actually being on the podium, 96, Monaco?
Yeah, well, we were sort of talking about that in the break, where when Jackie's day, it was only the man who won who actually was there on the podium, let's say. There were the second and third weren't there. So for me, the memories are always very nice of being able to get there on that podium itself. But of course, the race was just one of those, you know, you had to keep out of trouble. You had to sort of really do a nice pace the whole way through. That's sort of that rhythm that has to come into play for Monaco. And I was always comfortable around there because I thoroughly enjoyed driving around it. Qualifying, as I said before, was fantastic qualifying because you're on the edge, but the race was always another tool set that you had to use and try and be smart at the same time. And there were incidents going on, crashes going all around. There were some mechanical. I remember Damon, I think his engine went as well. But someone like Olivier did a brilliant race. You know, he kept on top of his game the whole way through and didn't make any
Well, we make a mistake there. We should have won it there, but
a lot of people should have won.
Yeah, but the attrition was high. You keep in mind, I mean, I won in '66 and only 4 cars finished. I mean, I led the race the whole way, but only 4 cars finished. And part of that because of Monaco. Manhole covers, curbs, all the things that today it's a billiard table and it's in beautiful condition, even though it's used every day.
I miss that, the bumps.
Every day. It's used by trucks, by buses, by cars, by motorcycles. It's a heavily used racetrack. And therefore, there were mechanical failures in those days because of the condition of the track. And you would get... Jim Clark never won the Monaco Grand Prix because the Lotuses were a very fragile piece of kit. And with fragility, if you're hitting the bottom because there's dips, and then if you're getting lifted up because of other humps or coming down on manhole covers, you know, the damage that was done. So that's why the attrition was so bad in those days. Today, we're seeing a lot of finishers in a Grand Prix in Monaco. Whereas in those days, there weren't a lot of finishers.
like you say, there are like billiard tables. Johnny J said, oh, yes, I missed the bumps. I think drivers would miss the bumps because...
It's a challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge. You can study the guy in front, where you're going to pass it if your car is better over the bumps than his, and things like that. Yeah. But now it's all like this, no.
that has been the charm of Monaco for so many years, this unexpected. The Jim Clarks never winning there. Nigel Mansell never won the Monaco Grand Prix. He led it many times, should have won it, like Jimmy, but didn't. And Jean-Pierre Beltoise suddenly won in '72.
We had water on the plugs, I remember that. Well, we should have won it with Jackie, yeah.
Now, Joe, speaking of water on the plugs and all things mechanical, I'm dying to ask you what it was like in the days when the teams went to a garage away from the circuit every night. Because the bit I used to love about that, reading about it, of course, was driving the car to the track the next morning, or indeed getting it out of there. And actually, you'd be driving the Formula One car most of the time, flipping the throttle, V12, no problem, holding it on the clutch, gendarme telling you to stop.
I remember 1967 with the Eagle, with Dan Gurney. I got married a couple of months before or a month before, and my honeymoon, I went to Italy driving, and I passed through Monaco looking for a garage where we can work on the cars.
Really?
And then we ended up working in that garage with Jack Brabham, the Brabham cars and the Eagle car. And it was in, oh God, I remember it was quite like 10 kilometers from the track.
Es-sur-Mer, maybe, somewhere around.
Sorry?
Es-sur-Mer is where Lotus used to be, I know that.
Somewhere, I can't quite remember. But anyway, I used to drive. Can you imagine driving a Formula One car in Monaco, from Monaco to, I can't remember the name of it. But
BRM had them in Monaco. We were up on the top of the, above the Princess Grace Ballet School. And that was a good place to be. A lot of windows there. And we used to drive the cars down.
Contacts. Was that contacts?
Most of the time, actually, the mechanics drove the cars down.
Yes, I used to drive the...
And you had a proper early morning practice too, didn't you, Jackie? 6:30 or something ridiculous. You used to be at the track waking everybody up.
In those days, because I was driving with BRM, they always had good hotels. So you were either in the Hotel de Paris or in the Metropole. Or in the Hermitage, and we walked down the track, and if all the crowds were there, it was a big palaver.
Like in the film.
The crowds were always, because you were in overalls, so everybody was recognising you. So it was a ritual almost. You came out of the Hotel de Paris or the Hermitage and walked down the hill, Saint-Devote.
See, I don't believe you. I think you were coming out of tip-top.
These modern drivers, I mean, it's scandalous, really, what they get up to.
It's amazing what you were saying before, that you take your emotions before you get in the car.
Sure.
Yeah. Very few people can do that. And I think
I learned that from shooting. Because, you know, if you're shooting, clay pigeon shooting I was doing, if you miss a target at the beginning of the shoot, you never get it back. You know, you're always 99 out of 100.
Yeah.
So I learned that if you had emotion, and you made mistakes because of emotion. I won most of my races in the first 5 laps because everybody was too uptight.
Yeah,
and the cars with heavy fuel in those days, no refueling, of course, as
we never
today.
worry where you qualified on the Tyrrell days.
Well, qualifying was unimportant.
First few laps, you were leading, yeah.
I'll never forget watching Lewis's first laps of Monaco in the GP2 race, and then subsequently in Formula One, and he was just superb from day one. But it's interesting that at the moment he's got a few Monacos to win to catch up with that and perhaps even beat that, and as we were talking about earlier. But that, how do you see Lewis and Monaco now, Sir Jackie, and that,
I think
harmony?
Lewis currently is the fastest Grand Prix driver in the world. I think that Alonso probably still has the best head when he's actually driving. He's very calculated and he does a great job. And when he gets a car that's good, if the McLaren gets that Honda engine and the chassis together,
by the time they get it,
I think he'll be very difficult to beat. But I do, and I think Lewis can do it. He's demonstrated it now that he can do it on a regular basis. And when you do it on a regular basis, you get peace in your mind that you're able, you know you've done it before, and you ease off when you can easily ease off. It's amazing how quickly you go when you ease off. You know, when I've run races where I've been told to slow down, you get the slow down signal from a Ken Tyrrell or somebody like that. Even at BRM, you slowed down and you went quicker because you weren't trying
hard. Segues back to the Senna point we were making earlier.
The car's an animal. The car likes being treated sweetly and nicely, and you just do things nicely with it. Whereas when you're driving it hard, you're bullying the car, and that's not the way the car likes to be driven. So when you backed off, everybody's saying, slow, slow, slow. But in fact, you're just so easy and you're still going quicker.
Johnny, Nico won in 2013. His dad won in 1983. A lovely bit of synergy there. He won again last year. Nico versus Lewis this year?
It's got to be Lewis, because I think Lewis' sort of edginess, which I think goes back to Ayrton. That's, to me, there's a lot of things that sort of you can sort of say are very, very similar. And I think Lewis is sort of on the edge, is one thing that he loves to do. And Monaco is a place that can sort of give you a very nice result at the end of the day. And I think he's got the car to do it. That's no doubt. But I think Jackie was saying about how you need all the right ingredients. And I think where he says with Fernando's very good with his mind, I think we're seeing the new Lewis Hamilton with that new mindset, with a comfortable situation of everything around him. I remember talking to him, and he's always had things aren't quite where I want them to be, and I haven't sorted them out yet. But I think he's in a much better place for that. But when he's in that place, my, he's going to be damn hard to beat. And I think Nico's got a damn tough one this year anyway.
Natalie, I think we have some more questions.
We do. We've got a question from your namesake, Mr. Herbert. Johnny, what's yours?
My name,
oh, got his arm around me.
My question's to Jackie. And Jackie, what is your favourite Grand Prix that you did not compete in?
Well, I didn't compete in the '68 Grand Prix because I broke a wrist in Harama, the scaphoid. It took a long time to mend. And I was there, and I was driving a car, the Matra at that time, that would have won the Monaco Grand Prix. And in fact, Johnny Servo-Gavin drove it and led the race, and then kissed a barrier and burst a tyre and broke a wheel and bent a suspension arm. So I would have loved to have done that one, but I never did it.
Well, thanks, Nats. Before I get the final thoughts of our gentlemen here, you've been to Monaco a few times as a fan and as a broadcaster. So why do you love it so much?
Well, there's no doubt that Monaco is magical, but I learned very quickly that stamina is everything. It's a marathon, not a sprint, that weekend, because it's a long old weekend. So in the first days with 5 Live, I went too hard too soon and was exhausted for about a month afterwards. But I tell you what, you were saying about all the superstars descending on Monaco. It was probably my highlight, actually, of all the times I've ever been there. Two short anecdotes. One was that Crofty and I were presenting the Amber Lounge fashion show together, and he really wanted to milk this moment. He was absolutely in his element. He was up on the stage, surrounded by models, loving every minute of it. And at that point, as he was introducing the fashion show, the bank of paparazzi moved off him. He was like, what on earth is going on here? This is about me. Justin Bieber had just walked in. Who is this little whippersnapper? I mean, Justin Bieber. Who is Justin Bieber? Crofty didn't know. And the second one was just to show you that the superstars that descend on Monaco is that I was there as a fan about 8 years ago, and we were the Red Bull motorhome, the floating motorhome, and Raúl, the Spanish, you must know the Spanish footballer, Raúl, sure. And he was there, and my mate said to him, oh, can we have a photo? So, of course, claro que sí, a photo, like this. She went, what are you doing? I just want you to take a photo of me and Mark Webber. She had no idea who he was. It was great.
I remember a certain star who was quite big at the time was down in pit lane, and suddenly nobody, just as you experienced, nobody was paying any attention to him because I had arrived with Sean Connery. And 007, at that time, Sean was just God for so many people, but he had such presence, and he was tall, and he was still a fantastic looking man. And as soon as he spoke, of course, everybody went silent because, again, the Sean Connery voice. But an interesting one was that Peter Sellers came one year, and Jimmy and I and Graham were talking to Peter Sellers, and he was a mimic, because he started speaking like Peter Sellers, and within about 3 minutes, it was like listening to a Scotsman. Because Jimmy and I were talking, the next minute, he just went into a Scottish dialect. Very annoying.
Joe, Monaco for you, just give us one thought that sums up the weekend for you.
I think it's the best race in the calendar. I loved it. I think that idea of racing around the streets, like all in our youth, terrorize our neighbors, and being able to do it kind of legally in a Formula One race it's fantastic. It must be, like Johnny said, the best race, and like Jackie said, the one that any driver wants to win.
Johnny, when you go to bed at night and you think Monaco, what comes to your mind?
Probably sort of the mid-80s, I think the turbo era. Trying to drive one of those sort of 1,300 horsepower beasts around that track, I think that would be something I miss. I wish I was there, basically in that 84 race that Ayrton probably did win, should have won, but didn't.
Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for. My thanks to my studio guests, Johnny Herbert, Joe Ramirez and Sir Jackie Stewart. And it's thanks to you too at home for watching. Bye for now.